without further ado, Deloris, I think that's
Well,
a good introduction.
first, I think we need to thank you for all what you've done. And this is my last try to really get this going. I've been through this over and over and over, and we all have. But if we all get together, we can do it.
Yes, we can. We just got to keep going. So, all right, without further ado, Deloris, take it away.
All right. It was in 1919 when my husband, Fred's father, became a manager of the lumberyard as it is, or as it was. It was Westerman's then. And but to go even back further, he often said that this crossroads here is where the farmers brought their grain because they had to ship it to Chicago, the excess grain. And the train did not come through here. The train was 7 or 8 miles away, so they all gathered together. And we don't know when the buildings were built, but the elevator was one of the first buildings to be built to store the grain so that they could take it 7 or 8 miles away to ship it into Chicago. The train did not go through here. I do not know when the train really came through. And later on, when you look at the pictures, you'll see that the train went on the other side of this depot. That was the main line. The train here was the spur line where they dropped off boxcars of lumber and coal, and it went on to Dundee Lumber, dropped off Hager Pottery clay, and so that was the spur line. But the real line went on this side of the depot, and that is one of the reasons that the stores turned their doors around. We understand a long time ago that First Street, is that First Street? First Street was the front of the stores, and they turned them around to face the train. But to go back to the lumberyard, it was in 1868, and it was before that this building was built for the elevator. And we don't know how much before that. Fred always said it was here before the East Dundee was incorporated. There's many dates for incorporation of East Dundee. And it became Hodges and Borden Company in 1870. And it went through a lot of changes. And then went Hodges, Borden, and Westerman. And then Borden and Westerman and Schmelz. And then in 1919, Walter Doederlein took management of it, but he was an employee of them before he took management. Before he became a manager, he was also worked for Neal's Lumber Company in Minnesota and was their photographer up there. And if you went to church on Sunday, you got a free dinner. A lot of the corporations did that at that time. Being of German descent, and I promised I was going to stay on topic, but this is just so good. Being of German descent, well, can you imagine what it was here when they started coming here? The Black Hawk Wars were just over with in 1835 to 1840, and people started coming. They started their own little families. They started their gardens. And they put the gardens in the front yard to keep away from all the wild animals that were out there. They could shoo them away. There were a lot more wild animals than just skunks and raccoons and squirrels. And so they put their gardens in the front lawns, and that's why they call it Dutch Flats. They came here, they planted instead of planting flowers, they planted their gardens to keep their gardens safe. Well, when I first came here, I planted a blueberry bush, strawberries, and raspberries right outside of my back door. And that was so wonderful until they kind of deteriorated. Now it's a flower garden. But to go back, and I do wonder, but to go back to 1919 when Walter Doederlein took over the management, and then later on, became known as the Farmers Co-op Elevator Company. I don't know exactly when the garage was built, but it was one of the first buildings built also. First the warehouse, and then the garage, because they had horses. They had also an ice business. They cut ice from the Fox River. They had the horses to draw the saws on the ice. Imagine ice forming so thick that the animals, the horses, could walk on the river. And then they would bring it and pack it with straw. And we had an ice house here, which has disappeared now. They took down the ice house. Also, there was another ice house in West Dundee, and one also in Carpentersville. And the horses were all here that pulled the ice saws. And during the war, in World War II, all of that machinery went to the war effort, all the big saws. But I did donate to the Dundee Township a lot of hand saws where they would cut the ice by hand.
How late into the season would you still be able to have ice there into the summer?
They had it, surprisingly, they could keep it all summer long. So that was also Elgin Lumber Company, the one where the statues are, as you turn down the road to the library. They also cut ice, and they stored butter there. Elgin was once the butter capital of the United States. And we had chickens up in the top of the stable, and there was still chicken stuff left when we tore it down or cleaned it out. In 1923, there was an addition made to the elevator company. Hager's was modernizing and getting more buildings, and so they didn't want this one building. So Walter Doederlein asked if he could have it, and they donated it, and they moved it up, and that was the addition that was here, the warehouse, the elevator, and then the warehouse. That was moved up from Hager Pottery. And then in 1925, Walter Doederlein became the owner of it, and it was incorporated into the Dundee Farmers Company. And there was new offices. The new office went up in 1925. Those must have been good years, 25, 26, 27. And they overbuilt. They also had some property that they bought. And they overbuilt, and they were living on South Street, a great big house. And they built one up where we live now, 301 King. And then they built Helm's house right across the street, Ralph Helm. And they built the Rico house, Hazel Rico's house. And then I guess it was 33 when the crash came or something like that, 33. And Walter Doederlein was behind the 8 ball. He had owed too much, like a lot of people right now. You owed too much, and you have too much land and too much property. So they had to sell the big house at a very low price, and they moved into the little house, which has been remodeled 7 times, so it's now called the House of 7 Gables. But that's how businesses go in circles, and it was a hard time for them. Then the war came along, and there was other problems besides there was a lot of business, but there were so many rules and regulations. You had to have a permit for everything. You had to document everything, how much gas was used by the trucks, and everything had to be documented. And if you went out, he had to go out west on the train a lot of times to be sure that he got the right lumber and brought them in. He had to have cement. And I don't know when the hill that goes up Main Street of Carpentersville, crossed by Otto's. But I remember Fred saying how they had all that cement to deliver over there. And he said he shoveled many, many tons of cement. And because a lumber yard at this time was not just selling lumber, but it was selling feed, lumber, glass, everything, coal. And at one time we did have about 1,000 tons of coal in those coal bins that were now torn down. They were lean years, and they were happy years. And the war years were problems, not so much for the lean years. You had the business, but you couldn't get anything. You couldn't get anywhere. And then the machinery was scrapped. And in 1950, it was incorporated into the Doederlein Lumber Company. And Fred's dad was getting older, and he wanted to go to stay in his house in Florida. So we bought it in 1968. Fred bought it in 1968. And we've been there ever since. And at one time, I think we employed so many high school children. We were like McDonald's. We had at least 6 or 7 high school children every year. And I did make a list of at one time, long time ago, of all the people that worked for us that I could find on the books. And it was 141 employees from, and some of these people are very famous now. Larry Keller worked for us, and you know who Larry Keller is, was the mayor of West Dundee. It was wonderful to be part of the community and hire these young people. Larry Nielsen, who works with the rockets, the space, he helped shoot off one of the space rockets, was from here, and he worked for us. John Oldenburg. The Oldenburg family. I bet you could find family names in here, some of your relatives, if you're an old Dundee person. And it was so nice to be in contact with everybody. And I was a teacher, and I was always Mrs. Doederlein. I was never Deloris. I've never been Deloris until Fred passed away. It was always, "You're Fred's wife," because I married into the area. And I was always Fred's wife, but so it's a little bit nice to be known as Deloris. But even when I was a state representative, I was still Fred's wife.
I was going to say that should have been your breakout.
And we built a lot of the garages in Meadowdale when they first moved out here. And Fred would go out there every night after work, and they would say, "Hey, Fred." "Hey, Mrs. Doederlein." And that too was a community affair. Those all came from the Quonset huts in Chicago, and a lot of those people. And I started teaching then, and I was at Parkview. And they would always know that the next group of people that were coming, and I started out with 9, and I ended up with 39 in my classroom. But that was another area and another story. I'm sorry. I promised myself I would stick on the topic, didn't I? Well, while Fred had the lumber yard, we bought off shirt lifts in Carpentersville. And I can't remember the name. Greg, help me out with the name. Help me out with the name of the man who ran Shirt Lift Company in Carpentersville. Oh, I can't remember his name. But we bought out Service Plating, which was connected to the Anvil Club across the street. John Talbert, Service Plating. And we did polishing then in the machine. Arnold Creek. Carpentersville Lumber, yeah. And Arnold Creek, yes. And there was Shirtlift and Huntley. I don't know. We're a little mixed up here. But anyway, we bought out John Talbert's Service Plating and did plating for Sherman Hospital and some of their hospital equipment, and also for International Harvester that was going overseas for digging some wells. And so we got into a lot of other businesses. Well, time goes past, and I do have in my audience a man who has worked for us for 44 years. And that was Greg Capacasa. Greg, you want to stand up? I think Greg should come up here.
Thank you for the acknowledgement. I appreciate that. I'll just say from here briefly that it's been an honor to be associated with the Doederlein family for such a long time. They're like my own family. And when Deloris was touching on all the part-time help that came from the high schools and all the teenagers, you know, I was right there to see that. The period of time that I was working for the family, we had dozens of part-time help during the summertime. And they always donated space for the floats. When they had when the schools had the big floats and the students would come, they'd put the chicken wire on and then stuff in the papers. Beautiful floats. They always made space for the float projects. There were multiple floats being made in the warehouse buildings. You know, never, if there was something in the way, move them out. It was float time. You know, they're very, very generous to that efforts and many other efforts in town over the years too. So thank you for that.
And Greg has Mid-Valley Glass, which is still in the lumber shed, but it's his own office now. And he still takes care of anything that I need, and thank you so much, Greg, for all your help. But I did want to mention that telephones. We were a subscriber to the Donnelly Press, and Fred was honored in 1986 as being the oldest telephone subscriber in Dundee Township.
What was the phone number?
Phone 8, don't wait. Phone 8, don't wait was the phone number. And Fred knew all of this from 1 to 11. He knew everybody's phone number. I wondered if there was ever a list at the Historical Society of what the phone numbers were. That would be very interesting to find out. But he sat next to Mr. Donnelly, and he didn't know it was Mr. Donnelly. And it was a very interesting celebration that he had. Phone 8, don't wait was it wasn't. It was 3455. Then we went to Hazel, and then we went to 301, and then we went to 708, and now we're 847. So phone 8, don't wait. When they were tearing down the warehouse, we found a lot of odds and ends, and this was one of them. And this was very interesting, the closing notice. We will be closed all day, New Year's, 4th of July, Labor Day, and Christmas. We will be closed from 10 a.m. for the balance of the day, on Memorial Day, Thanksgiving. And then they had all the listed of names that would be closed. Hager, Fisher, Grace, all the stores that were going to be closed on those days. And another thing that we found on the building was this. William J. Burris. But I remember that we paid about $10 a month for a policeman to come around and check the doors and check the businesses. All the businesses paid. We didn't have a policeman going around checking, and we didn't have that many policemen, so they had somebody go around checking all the doors a couple of times. I think the old buildings have been photographed more than any other buildings in town. This is one of them, and I thought it was just a very nice yellow wall. Yeah. I remember one time we started painting, and we started with gray, so they have a base coat. Everybody in town started hollering and calling because it's got to be yellow. And Lyle said, well, when you paint the garage back here, "You going to paint it red?" And I said, "No, it's going to be yellow." He said, "Oh, paint it red." And I said, "No." He said, "I need a red barn." I said, "No, it's got to be yellow because otherwise people will holler. Yellow is the lumber yard." And it's always been a color for lumber yards, red for barns.
Excuse me a moment. I need to interject this. That building is probably on people's canvases and pictures all over the Chicagoland area. There was always somebody sketching it with an artist's easel, photographing it. Professional photographers would come with their clientele and pose them on the walkway in front of that building all the time. We had, just the last few years before it came down, several times a wedding photographer doing wedding photos in the area and also using that building as a backdrop. So that image of that building is all over the Chicagoland area, I'm sure. Highly photographed, painted, and memorized.
Another thing is that the lumber shed, which is the big building that's still there, was the first lumber shed in the state of Illinois when it was built that was totally enclosed without slats for wind to go through it in between.
But we have to tell you that it was engineered, and it was supposed to be the best one in the country. It was engineered so that there's not cement all over the place. It's just the driveway is cement. The rest is off ground, so that the air can get through even though there are not the slats that they used to have. So it was the first building that was built to dry lumber in an enclosed area. Oh, that was very interesting. When we were out west, we went to a studio, and the artist would happen to be there, Virginia Brooks, and Fred says, "That's my truck." And so she inscribed it. It wasn't what he wanted. He wanted it real dark so he could see Doederlein lumber, but you can see it. And later on, it became one of the cover sheets for one of the magazines. So we were real pleased with that.
What is the structure that's still there that looks like a barn? Greg, I know you spoke to me often.
The building in the back?
The barn, yeah.
The building in the back was the old stables, and that stabled the horses because they needed the horses for the various functions in town, cutting the ice and also delivering all the lumber at the time before the trucks came around. You know, all the lumber and all the material, the cement and everything had to be delivered, so it was naturally by horse and wagon, which we still have one of the wagons that they used to pull. We managed to salvage and keep one of those in excellent shape. Eventually, it went from the horse stable, I never knew it as that, as just a general garage for implements for the lumberyard. There was an old Stoker coal furnace that I used to have to work. Many people may remember the old coal furnaces. They kept that going year-round because they had sand in there, so it wouldn't freeze up. People would come to the lumberyard for dry sand. It was tough to get dry sand in the middle of winter. So that was the stables, and then implement building that housed front-end loader at the time. That took over men with shovels. And it's still there, and it'll be revamped and repainted and all cleaned up, and it's kind of a historical building there.
The old truck still back there? The truck's
Oh, I got to tell you, we just sold it. It had a tree growing through the hood. It had a tree growing through the back, and somebody wanted it for $350, and I said, sold.
They weren't going to restore it.
No.
They were going to take it and put it, they had acreage. I'm not sure if it was in western Illinois here or Iowa. They were going to take it out and put it out in the field for ambiance.
Their own tree in there.
Yeah.
Did they make a tree?
So I did bring something for each one of you. If I can find it. Here. This is something we found in the warehouse too. They're a little rusty. I did wash them, but they are, you know what they are for? Well, remember the coal shovels that had big handles, wooden handles? You put this by your stoker, and then you had your shovel hanging on it. So here is there's an antique for each one of you that came today. They're a little rusty, but it still says phone 8, don't wait. Don't wait for good fuel. So. Well, that concludes my story, but I got a lot of other stories. Thank you. Thank you.